All right, so thanks so much for taking the time to do this. My first question that I have for you is tell me a little bit about yourselves and how you got started in the disability community. Emily, I'll start with you, then I'll we can go to Charlie.
Okay. Well, hi, Laszlo, and thanks for having me. I'm Emily Harris, and I am a senior TA training manager with WISE. I can do a quick visual description. I'm a white woman in my late 30s. I have long brown hair. I'm wearing a blue jumper with a black turtleneck underneath, and I'm zooming in with a white background behind me. Um, let's see, how did I get started in this work? I have had the good fortune to be connected to people with disabilities my whole life. I'm a sibling, one of four children, and one of my siblings has a disability. And also, I have grown up knowing people with disabilities just through personal connections and seeing people involved in my community thriving, family members and beyond. And so when I graduated from college, I had a very short stint working at a day program, which was centered around art and music and theater. I graduated in 2008, and I was really uh, eager to get into the workforce. And I wasn't desperate for a job, but if anyone watching this was looking for a job in 2008, you remember it was a hard time for anyone. And I learned really quickly that that work wasn't the right match for me in the sense that a day program that is centered around art and music and theater is a highly segregated place versus like a community space where people could come to. I did learn how to DJ, but I also sparked what other ways could I support and work with people with disabilities to create and explore access in a different way. And so from there, I made a quick pivot to employment equity, where I've been ever since. And that really has been pivotal to uh, thinking about how people can access true inclusion, true community, true opportunity through paid employment. So a long runabout. That's how I got in. Thanks for the question, and I'll pass it over to you, Charlie.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks again, Laszlo, for having us. I am Charlie Walters. I work for WISE. Also a senior TA and training manager. I am based out of Spokane, Washington, and I am a white woman in my mid 40s with light brown hair, brown eyes. I'm wearing a dark green shirt. I have to look at myself. A dark green shirt, paisley overalls, I guess, and my background is blurred. I am in my home office. Um, I also, I think, have a little bit of a lengthy history and background getting into this field, but I grew up in a very, very small town in Eastern Washington, and there they didn't know to segregate people with disabilities. We were all just in the same class. We all lived in the same tiny community. We all played sports together. Um, and so it was shocking to me. I also am a family member of somebody with a disability. It was shocking, surprising when I moved to Seattle and started hearing stories about how that is not the case really anywhere else. And I felt really lucky to have grown up in such a close and small community. Um, and while I was in college, I started volunteering with Special Olympics as a coach. And then I also worked at a camp that had campers who were adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I loved it. I loved it so much. I thought it was just super fun and um, just, yeah, I dug it. So after college, I lived abroad for a little bit. When I came back, I started doing some in-home care, some residential work, and then I worked at a high school up in Marysville doing some one-on-one support. Um, and travel became much more expensive, so I got a job locally at Northwest Center in King County and became a job coach, and that was in 2007. So I've been in the field for a while. yeah, so I was there and then I came to Spokane, still with Northwest Center, and I've been with WISE for 7 years.
Cool. So if I could get a little bit, talk a little bit about some of the roles that you do as employment specialist, what sorts of things do you do in that regard? Same thing, I'll go to Emily first, then we'll move over to Charlie.
Yeah, so thanks. I know Wise is in the background, and I think I said my role. Charlie, thanks for clarifying. We both work for an organization called Wise, and at Wise, we do training and consulting around employment equity, which is like such a big umbrella. And our partners range from employers, agencies who support people with disabilities to get into the workforce, people with disabilities looking to navigate into the workforce, communities, schools. So it's kind of like this big umbrella that touches a lot of, not touches, reaches a lot of people in lots of different ways. And so, Charlie, thank you for highlighting too some of the different roles that you've done specifically between when you got started and now. And I also have worked as an employment consultant. I work for an organization called Trillium Employment Service. And when I was there, I would work directly with people to help think about who you are, how you thrive, and where you could work. And I had the opportunity to navigate and help find paid employment for people. After that, I worked as a positive behavior support specialist, thinking about how to support people to get their needs met and create access. And now at Wise, I get to do a combination of all those things. So as I guess, not working directly with people to help find jobs per se, sometimes, because sometimes our services through consulting lead to doing things like person-centered plans with a person and their team to then help implement the next steps, or sometimes with employer initiatives. In my role, I'm getting to present to employers and think about, what are some of the needs and how could I, as a community member and a consultant, help leverage some of the relationships with job candidates, job seekers in local communities to help get into the workforce. So I'd say I'm adjacent to the role of an employment consultant, and where I get to interface is through being a consultant, coordinating training in my role at WISE. I get to coordinate a national training series. I sometimes get to train with employment consultants to think about how do you do this work, how do you do it well, and how do you do it so people get true opportunities where they're getting money and they're getting to do things that they love that they can thrive at. Charlie?
Thank you. I want to just plug Emily. Emily is she has our, I guess, most viewed course in the WISE Learning Center, which I would love to tell you a little bit about maybe towards the end, but yeah, Emily is a wonderful trainer. So yeah, I was a job coach and then an employment consultant. And so again, just echoing what Emily said about her role, getting to know folks, figuring out what types of jobs they have, what meets their needs, and then trying to figure out how to make that match. Luckily, in my role now with WISE, I get to manage a Spokane County initiative called Hireability Spokane, where I still do some aspects of job development. What I'm really focusing on now is creating more accessibility and inclusion with the hiring process. And so I'm consulting with local businesses, trying to help them make sure that their doors are open to all job seekers, and that kind of just breaking down some barriers and making sure that they understand inclusion and universal design.
Mm-hmm. So my next question is like, how do you make sure that people with disabilities have the resources they need to really find, keep, and maintain employment, although that is part of it. So, and it's more to it than that. So, Emily, if you could talk a little bit about this first, and then Charlie, you can feel free to add in.
Thank you. Great question. And I go back and forth in our introductions, both Charly and I talked about this connection to our experience as a family member and seeing personally people thriving because you have a community that believes in you. And then that kind of the shock of the being a worker in this field where unfortunately sometimes the reality is for people with disabilities, there's lots of low expectations and it's like we know there's a need for people to be in the workforce. We know that there's jobs that people can do and it can look lots of different ways. And yet the unemployment rate for people with developmental disabilities is so high. It's been stagnant and I'd say staggering at the same number since I've been in the field for 16 years. It's like, well, what is it about it? We have resources available. We have people thinking about, how can you move someone and move with someone forward, like just keep moving towards that. And I go back and forth, but I keep going back to the sense of community, and it's like communities want to include people, communities have family members with disabilities and neighbors with disabilities and have patrons in their stores. It's like this is a sense of community. And so in some ways, I feel like the work that happens in our field can sometimes get in the way, right? Because we are like, well, I'm going to add this service and this resource, and then that kind of slows the process, or it's not done in a really intentional way, or we're going to fit someone into this job that's for people with disabilities versus really thinking about like how to, when the resources are used well, it's like you're really thinking about who someone is, where they would thrive, and then supporting them ongoing, fading so they have a typical job just like anyone else with accommodations and support. And I think over time, I hope that more employers and community members just start acting to be like, hey, not everyone's included in our process, so what can we change? And then enlisting the resources to say, here's some ideas, exactly what Charly's doing around accessibility, around onboarding practices, around finding good candidates who live right here in your neighborhood, in your community. But I think there are resources when they're done well and things are set up right. It's awesome because you get to see people, in a job and having, making money and things are great. But Charly, what are your thoughts on that? And thank you both for letting me kind of riff there for a minute.
You're such a great riffer. Yeah, I 100% agree with everything you said. I was just taking some notes. I think something amazing that we're doing here in Washington is like the nothing about us without us. And so I think when I think about people keeping their jobs, it's really just making sure that when they have the job, they are at a table where people are making decisions and they are a part of the typical aspects of that workplace, that they're being included. Something I love to do, and I've done this with the city of Spokane. They in particular have a lot of seasonal work. We have beautiful riverfront park. There are a lot of seasonal employees, and because it's a summertime job, there are younger and younger supervisors and managers. And so I love to work with them on this is how you can support your employees. And it's not just employees with disabilities, but it's all employees. I'm just coming at it with that disability lens and framework. And so, really providing some basic tips around how to supervise people. And I think that's been really helpful. I think, especially if people are younger, they haven't had experience so much with people with disabilities. And so just kind of providing some context that like, you're going to treat all the people that you manage similarly. You're going to want to, if there's an issue, you're going to want to address it with them first, offer support, offer your assistance. And so, yeah, I think luckily in my role, I get the time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Laszlo, can I say one thing as a follow-up to Charly? Because it sparks something for me where that gives me hope, actually, Charly. It's like when I have worked with employers that have younger people who have had a similar experience in school where people were included in a different way than in the 90s and in the 80s and in the 70s. And now they're in manager positions where it's not new, the idea of we need to include people. It's a different perspective than when I first started, where sometimes it felt like you had to convince someone to be like, this person's going to be a great employee. And then they were, and the person's like, I wasn't sure. And now they're great. And it's amazing. It's working out great. But the story has changed slightly, where people who are in positions of power and hiring have had a different experience.
Mm-hmm. Emily, you talked a little bit about some of the inequalities that happen in particularly on the employment level for people with disabilities. So I'm wondering, what your take is on like what, Washington State is doing to sort of address this. What have they done in this legislative session, or what do they plan to do in this current legislative session to address this sort of inequality? You can start first, and then Charlie could add.
Yeah, I mean, I think Washington State is a leader in this work and the in the country and I mean in the world. I feel like I've been in conversations recently where people are saying, what's happening in the US around employment? We're trying to figure it out. And Washington State and the Pacific Northwest really has this long-standing history of leading and thinking about how to include people intentionally in the workforce. Charlie, you mentioned the bill that just passed. There's there's strong advocacy in the state of Washington and partnerships. And funding that happens here. I feel like Washington State really does a thoughtful job of ensuring that not only are there resources available, but the people that are providing those, it's like there's training options available. So I feel like Washington is really impressive in how they're thinking about employment and inclusion. Charlie, I'm wondering if you have anything to add to that. And I will say I have the very good fortune to be an Oregonian who gets to work in Washington. I do a lot of work in um, certain parts of the state. So, Charlie, as a true Washingtonian, your thoughts and observations.
I thank you. I don't know that I'm as up to speed as I would like to be on what's going to be upcoming this year, but I do think that the Nothing About Us Without Us bill was a huge milestone for us. And I love also that it started out as a disability thing, and then the way that it grew and expanded, it's like it's really including all populations. And I see another thing that Washington's doing that I haven't seen in other states. There are agencies that are hiring people with disabilities in an advocacy role and in leadership roles. And I think it has so much value. Just like what we would tell a business, like just like an innovation and then that lived experience, and being able to hear that and then shape policies, I think has put Washington in a really great spot. The other thing is we have had wonderful leadership at DDA, and DDA has been supportive, and DDA is, I think they're why we get to be a leader in the country with supported employment.
Mm-hmm. What can be done at the federal level to address this? Because like to make sure that is sort of that the needs of people with disabilities around employment are met. I'm wondering what your take is on that. Emily, to you first, and then Charlie follow up.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of effort and a lot of energy happening around employment. And I think we're going to continue to see, change happening. I think the advocacy piece is really important. I can talk about it from the perspective of like where I see it within my role. So I mentioned I coordinate a project that is a national training series for employment professionals across the country. And we also have people who join us internationally sometimes from New Zealand to go through this. And what's interesting is the states where there's a lot of funding and energy and employment, it's like you kind of see the trends pop up through this course, because Washington State has helped continuously fund and make this training possible. And then it shifted to an online platform during the pandemic, which then made it possible for other people to come from other states. But recently, in the past years, it's like we see kind of pockets of states popping up through this training series. And it's because all of a sudden there's new funding or new rules or policies within a certain area around training requirements to do this work. And so I feel like that usually is kind of like oh, now, in Arizona or in California, there's a new requirement around what is the qualification to do this work and do it thoughtfully and intentionally, which I think are really good signs. That's some of the ways I see it. And then also some stuff that's happening currently around the shift with 14C. You see some shifts in employment because agencies that were historically providing a certain type of work are now shifting into community-based, inclusive employment opportunities. And to make that shift takes some additional thought and practice and training. So that's where we've seen it. And then when WISE first opened our Oregon office, it was around helping to provide training and consultation with a transformation project. So 25 agencies across the state of Oregon that were transforming their sheltered employment settings into community-based, integrated, individualized employment. And so that's another area where within my role and within the stuff we get the opportunity to touch at WISE, we see when we're pulled in for these different projects in new places, which I think is a really good sign that people are thinking about this all over. And I know we have a short amount of time. Charly, we're going to go to you. And then Laszlo, I'm like, you're a reporter. I'm like, I can't wait to talk to you to hear more about what you know too. I'm sure there will be, there's a lot of stuff constantly happening, but that's where I see it in my role.
Such a robust answer. I love that. 14C, I don't know if your audience has the context, but that's the sub-minimum wage certificate. And so that's also a huge piece of legislation that's been, I think, monumental for us in our field. I agree with Emily. I'm a person with less words maybe, but I think consistency. I really think we want states to be able to chart their own course and do what works for them. And at the same time, I think that Washington has been able, and Oregon have been able to implement some really great practices. And I think, like Emily was saying, through our national training series, we are able to share those out, which has been really good. But I think, and that's kind of why I brought up Washington State with our last point, because we get the funding, we have the support, and it's not that way in quite a few other states. And so somehow implementing consistency, I think, would be a phenomenal shift federally.
I want to follow up on a point that you said, Charly, about like you guys, when you like fund these programs for employment, you have the funding and everything. So like, what can other states learn from this? How can they sort of really implement ways to sort of follow that same model or trajectory? First of all, have you guys gotten into contact with other state organizations, groups around employment?
Yes. Okay, I'm assuming I'm going to answer first. So, yes, we have worked with Colorado and Georgia recently. We're working with Arizona. Our executive director, Cecily, is always in communication with folks. We've worked in Oregon. We're working in North Carolina. Maryland, maybe New Mexico, North Dakota. Yes, thank you. Emily's posting these things in the chat for me. It's really helpful. I think, and even in my work here in Spokane, I think some professionalism, and it's an interesting thing because we are social service adjacent. People would consider us social workers in a way. I think when working with businesses in employment specifically, approaching it more like we are business people, we work for businesses, which is what we are, and it is what we do, and so that's one way I think. And then I don't know how the funding works in the other states. I wish I did. I wish we could go in and help them all. I think, and this is such a great question. Washington DDA offering some sort of support or mentoring to other states could be a really great thing. If they could federally support that, that would be awesome. What do you think, Emily?
Yeah, when I put in the chat the states, my mind goes to like the elementary school song where all the states are in the alphabet, so I won't sing it. And I was thinking about some of the ways that WISE is connected through like national organizations and partnerships, APSI, Association for People Supporting Employment First, and then TASH, and also how some of these questions, I'm like, oh, we got to get you on with our director. Like we can connect you with some of our state partners who could help answer some of these questions from their perspective, because I'm thinking about it from our role as well, like how this shows up. And I also have this sense too, where it's like, yes, we have seen employment look a certain way on kind of a larger scale in our community. There's obviously still so much more to be done. And then I think about in other communities in the country, when I've had the opportunity to be in community or travel to different places, honoring that, like, yeah, even though the structure and the system might look different, there's still pockets of excellence happening everywhere. It's like there are things happening. There's parents who are, an advocate and a champion with people. There's people that are advocating for themselves and their rights. And so it's like you see that in stories and examples all over. I think it's just like onward. I was just in a meeting before this, and my wonderful mentor and colleague, this woman, Anna O'Brien, was talking about how she always says, are we going in the right direction? Are we going in the right direction as a checkpoint? And I think, yes, movement is happening, but it's like, okay, what's next?
Mm-hmm. To kind of wrap this up, how can sort of companies and or other entities create an inclusive hiring process that really put people with disabilities and those of other backgrounds? Because I think people with disabilities come from a variety of backgrounds and experiences. So I'm wondering how can those companies and entities help sort of have them have a seat at the table to sort of figure out how they can contribute to our workforce.
Charly, I'm wondering if you want to start with this because you are enmeshed in your work with employers, and then I can follow up. I get to do some of this too.
Yeah. I think so. I have been involved with SHRM, which is the Society for Human Resource Management, and it's a national organization. I've seen them really doing a push. They have a free course that's about 10 hours on how to hire and support people with disabilities in the workplace. And so things like that, it makes me super excited because they're providing resources. And I'm, coming in and giving them like more of the personal touch with their own specific processes. I think there's a desire, but I've loved the shift of, wanting to I've seen a lot of companies who have DEI initiatives and DEIA initiatives and DEIB initiatives in their strategic plans. And I think that's a great step forward. What I see missing is the lack of, there's just not a lot of awareness that disability fits into their DEI initiatives. And so I really just talk about it as much as I can and offer services to businesses here locally and that are at no cost to them. And so that's kind of what I'm doing on this smaller scale. There are a lot of bigger companies who are more national and they have initiatives. Um, I guess more publicity would be great. What do you think, Emily?
I love that answer, Charlie. Thanks for taking the lead. And I agree. I feel like companies and businesses and um, people are thinking about inclusion in a different way than the last 10 years and helping them to think about how disability fits into that, and particularly hiring people with developmental disabilities. Like what are we talking about when we're talking about supports, accommodation, the resources, like kind of breaking that down or supporting people to understand, amplifying stories of people working and, what does that look like and how is that created change for a person and also a company. I think stories are such a great way to help get kind of the what are we talking about out. And then, yeah, talking about it as much as possible. But I think this shift in the right direction in the sense that, yeah, you see large companies making public statements, leading the way around hiring people in the Pacific Northwest. We have Microsoft, Amazon, different people that influence how business works. And so I think the more other companies can see that and see examples of that, that will also help shift internally because, peer to peer.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right.